Very excited about today's topic because this matters. And we're talking about guilt and shame. And you have spoken about this with me many different times. And interesting enough, this has been a topic on a couple different of my coaching sessions and different conversations. There's a power in guilt and shame, but there's also a power that can be on a negative side. Correct?
Yeah, we're talking about two of the most universal and powerful feelings you're ever going to have in your life, guilt and shame. And if you're a leader, you had better understand how to manage, how to get rid of, how to use and leverage guilt and shame. When I say use and leverage, what I mean is not go guilt and shame the hell out of your people. I mean, those things are going to be present in your people. As much as we love to think that when people show up to work, when people show up wherever it is that we're leading them, that they hang their human problems up on a hook with their coat and then walk in and they're great employees, they're human beings the whole way through. Guilt and shame play a huge role in our lives and a huge role in the organizations that we work, play, and live for.
Well, awesome. Listen, we're going to be right back in just a few more seconds with Coach Kevin as we get ready to get into this conversation. You're not going to want to miss episode 6 of Language of Leadership. Be right back. All right, Coach. So right before we went to the intro, we were talking about this aspect of guilt and shame being two of the most powerful elements in our lives. Explain to me why these things that seem to destroy us internally, mentally, emotionally, how are they positive? How are they powerful?
Oh, they're hugely positive, right? This is how I would explain how guilt and shame are positive, right? And they're two very different things. We'll talk about what makes them different and how they operate. But here it is. You remember, like when I was 5 years old, my grandmother was going to cook pancakes, right? So she's going to put pancakes for me. She's making the batter over on the side. She puts the it's like a heavy iron, skillet on the stove. And at a point, she says, "Yeah, the pan's not hot enough yet. As soon as it's hot enough, I'll pour these pancakes out." Right. So me, as a 5-year-old, I take my finger to see, if it's not hot enough, I wonder how hot it is. Right. And I put my finger onto the pan. Now, not hot enough for pancakes did not mean that it wasn't hot enough to cook the tip of my finger. Right. When you do that, when you touch a hot pan, as many of us had when we were little, you remember at 47 years old right now, 42 years later, I remember I have a visceral feeling of what that felt like to touch that hot pan, right? It hurt. I wanted my finger off of it, and I never, ever, ever wanted to touch a hot pan again. So why am I talking about that? That is a pain response, my friend. That is a pain response that says, "Whoo, don't do that. That's dangerous," right? That pain taught me something about life, right? Same as the pain of doing a skateboard move wrong, the pain of doing any number of things that I've done that I have pain. Like there is pain all growth brings pain, but not all pain is growth, right? And there are these moments in our life that this pain response lets us know, wow, don't do that. Like that is a not to repeat action, right? So when people say, well, how is guilt and shame useful? Because look, it is. If it wasn't useful, it wouldn't be so damn prevalent, right? I mean, it's damn near the basis for many of our social structures. Like it's damn near how shit runs all over our society, right? But what I want you to see though is that at base, guilt and shame are pain responses, and they come from different places. They have different uses, but that is important because with no pain, if we felt no pain, we would die pretty quickly.
So this is this going back to the no pain, no gain? And I want to go back to a little quote you just said that I thought was very powerful. And you said all growth has pain, but not all pain has growth. Yeah, I think that's really important, Coach, that we get into that.
All growth brings pain. All growth. And I tell my clients this all the time. Hey, we're gonna accomplish this target. We're gonna accomplish this goal in your life, but you're gonna have to grow as a person. All growth brings pain. all growth brings pain, but not all pain is growth. And it's very important to distinguish that, right? Just because you're in pain doesn't mean you're growing, right? You and your husband having an argument, and that drives you to some greater understanding. It's uncomfortable for you. It's uncomfortable for him. There's a pain there associated. That could be bringing growth, right? Your husband beating you regularly over time, there's plenty of pain there, but there's no growth at all. So all growth brings pain, but not all pain is growth. But the way that guilt and shame help us, truthfully, they're essentially an emotional pain response, right? So the way that they help us is let us know, I don't want to do this again. Now, there's some little asterisks, etc., and shame with shame. But today we're going to talk about guilt. We're going to talk about shame and the resolution of guilt and shame, which is really one of the main mantras in my coaching, which is no guilt, no shame. And then, I'll cliffhang you to the end on the third thing. Many of you guys know this already, but there is a resolution. There is a way to clear guilt and shame definitively. And you need to know that, because while shame and guilt are very useful on the short term, they're extremely damaging, and they will rot and poison your teams and yourself and your soul if kept long term, or used repeatedly over and over and over about the same things. So as much value as you can get from feeling guilt and shame, hanging on to it past the point where you have made new decisions is really useless. So let me give you the mantra here. It's no guilt, no shame, new choices. We clear both guilt and shame by making new choices. But the two things are very different, though. Let's talk about what guilt is, and let's talk about what shame is, right? I think people use those two terms interchangeably, and they're not. And I want to be very clear, since we're on the Language of Leadership podcast, that we're very clear and precise with our language, right? Guilt, and this is a very rudimentary definition of guilt, but I think it's just one that serves and helps everyone to be able to understand. It's like a 7-year-old definition of guilt. Guilt is me saying to myself, I ought not to have done that. I wish I didn't do that. I'm feeling the emotional pain of having made a mistake, or done something that caused harm, or done something that I perceived that caused harm. So guilt is me telling myself, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Shame is some other group of people, right? Whether that be, it's society outside. It's a group of people saying you shouldn't do that. Now, those two things seem very similar, and they are very similar, because, ultimately it's, I don't want to do that, or do that. I don't want to do that, or you shouldn't do that. But remember, guilt is generated internally. So guilt comes from within ourselves. Wish I hadn't done that. Shame is more, hey, you shouldn't do that. Right? Now, if you accept the authority of the group, if you accept the authority of the person who's shaming you, then that can be really useful, right? When you're young and your parents are like, don't do that, that's very important, right? Because you don't really know what things are safe, what things aren't. And so our parents will often say, hey, don't do that. Don't, like, shame on you, right? So shame is pretty useful. The problem with guilt and shame is when we carry them forever and ever and ever, right? We make a mistake. Like, we cheated on our first high school girlfriend. Now we're 40 years old and we're still crying ourselves to sleep about how we cheated that one time when we were in high school. Why? For what purpose? We're just carrying around damage. We're constantly reinforming ourselves that we're a cheater and we're this bad person because we made this mistake one time. Remember, like the pain response. Why did I have such a horrible pain response when touching a pan? Well, it hurts, but it also prevents me from just doing it again. I don't sit around and cry about the fact that when I was 5, I burned my finger on a hot pan. I just know that I don't want to touch hot pans. And even when I'm around pans, I kind of like test them with the back of my hand, feel over them, see if they're hot, right? 42 years later, I'm still very careful around those situations. Same with guilt, same with shame. Same with guilt and same with shame. They're just saying, hey, I don't want to have done that. So when I'm feeling guilty about something, right? My wife and I got in an argument last night. I got a little bit like crazy, I just got really defensive, right? Like everything she said, I saw it as an attack, and that she was trying to tell me how dumb I was, right? I just got really defensive. I got really unreasonable, I would say. And I don't like that. I feel some guilt about that, right? Like I feel like, I wish I wasn't so damn defensive. Why is it that in an argument I can't just admit that I could be wrong, right? But what do I do about that? Here's the problem with guilt and shame, right? This is where guilt and shame can turn to poison. If in the moment I'm like, I don't want to do this, great, then I can course correct in that moment. Oftentimes, though, we feel guilt after the fact. So it's the next morning we wake up, we realize, man, that is, I wish I wouldn't have done that, right? Well, what can I do about it now? I did it yesterday. It's already done. It will forever have been done. Well, what I can do is make new choices from here. So again, that's why we say no guilt, no shame, new choices. New choices will clear the damage, will clear the pain, will clear the issue of either guilt or shame. New choices. So once I'm making a new choice, once I say, hey, I'm never going to touch a pan like that again, right? I'm never going to get that defensive. Next time I feel myself getting that defensive, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to say out loud to my wife, I feel like I'm getting super defensive and I'm not even hearing anything you're saying. I'm just arguing for arguing's sake, right? I'm gonna create a new choice that I can make to change course, and that's the power of guilt, right? So that's why it's an important ingredient. I've seen this recently a lot of people. We're gonna eliminate guilt. We're gonna eliminate shame. That would be terrible. I don't even think it would be good if you eliminated shame. You would really have a problem parenting, and I don't mean shame like, oh, you bad boy for over and over and over and over. Right. But there is a certain amount of, hey, you shouldn't do that because this is what's going to happen that you've got to engage in as a parent. And so that short term, it's the poison with guilt and shame is in the duration, right? It's in the exposure. It's not in the thing itself. Hey, feeling guilty. I walk in the room. I don't see my kid. I accidentally knock him over. Oh, man, I'm sorry, kid. Right. I do that 3, 4, 5 times in a row. Okay, so now I don't know what the hell I'm doing. The guilt is what has me slowing down when I walk through that same door the next time, right? Just like my pain response kept me off of the pan.
Now that makes perfect sense because there are levels, right? We were talking about this offline. There are levels of guilt, shame, and I don't think in this conversation at all are you stating that certain choices we make in our life don't go away, right? We're not saying that you can move past certain mistakes, but living in what those poor choices have led you to, whatever the outcome is, living in that guilt, living in that shame isn't going to do anything to create a better future. But if we're not embracing what those are, we'll make the same mistakes again.
Right, correct. So if you eliminated guilt totally, you would totally eliminate your internal, I don't want to do this meter, right? I want to go further, though, to say it's not about you can't create a future. If you don't put down guilt and shame, if you don't learn the lessons, if you don't course correct the way that you should, why? Because you're feeling guilt and possibly because you're feeling a shame that you agree with, and we'll talk about that in a second. But if you don't acknowledge, like, hey, I'm feeling guilty about this, then it's not that you are going to not be able to create some awesome future. You're going to be actively screwing up your present. You're just going to be walking around. I mean, there's a reason that we say people are racked with guilt, right? Rack, right? Now, because I work out, when I hear the word racked with guilt, I think of like a squat rack with like 1,000 pounds on it. But the word racked with guilt comes from the rack in the Middle Ages, right? Where you would tie people to a table, ropes on the hands and feet, and then crank them longer and longer and longer apart until finally they broke in half, right? This is racked with guilt. You're racked with this. It's just wheedling on you. Because why? Because you haven't made the new choice. That's where I think people get trapped with guilt, is they don't understand that, like, hey, okay, I'm feeling this. That means I don't want to do this. All right, now I can make a new choice. And then you move on. Because you said, like, hey, most things you're going to move on from. Here's the thing. Unless you die, everything you're going to move on from. Every single choice you make, you're going to move on from until you die. And then I don't really know what happens then, so I'm not going to talk about it. But it's not like, oh, well, some situations you move on from. No, all of them you move on from. There is a tomorrow, and tomorrow that situation isn't happening still. It already happened. Now, there may be consequences from that you deal with the rest of your life. It may be that you made a choice that had for example, an employee storm out and quit, and now they never work at the company anymore. Great. But the guilt of that, really, its only use and value is so for you to recognize what you do and do not want to do again. Now, shame is a little different, right? So we say no guilt, no shame, new choices. It's easy to see in guilt how new choices correct that, because I made a choice. I don't want to do that anymore. So now I correct it with making new choices, right? That's the resolution, right? You do something one time and screw up. Okay, you screwed up. We got to course correct that. You keep doing it over time. Now you're just a piece of shit. Now you have a problem. Now all the things that we usually associate with guilt apply. But as long as you're making the new choice, you can let go of the guilt. It has no more use. You can let it heal, right? My finger doesn't still have the scar. That was 42 years ago. It's gone, but for a good little while, I had this really crazy looking finger because I had burnt the pad of it off. Now, shame's a little different. Shame is someone else outside. It's society. And I don't mean society like at large, although it can be that as well. At any level, so maybe it's your church, maybe it's your office, like maybe it's just your group at your office, maybe it's whatever, your division head, your group, and that shame is your group saying, hey, you ought not to have done that, you shouldn't do this, right? And that is a little tougher, right? Because when we say no shame, new choices, well, how do you change them if they're telling you what you should do? Well, the first choice that you have to make inside of shame, the first choice to make is you need to really think, do I accept the perspective of these people, right? If my father is telling me, man, I don't think you should have done that, I'm going to listen very differently than if some random ass troll online who sees one of my videos, hears a story about me, and then makes a comment, says it, right? Like, he can say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Well, I don't care what he thinks. He's not in the arena with me. Like, he's just some guy on the internet typing. Who cares, right? Like, the first choice with shame is, do I accept this or not? And I'm going to tell you that for me, the people that I'll accept shame from, meaning when they give me feedback that you shouldn't have done it, I consider it truly. It is my family, right? My wife, number one, like really just my wife, number one. Anytime she says there's a problem, I am forced to recognize that there's a problem, the way I live my life. Then my family. Then anybody that I'm paying, so I might have consultants, I have coaches, I have whatever, and then anybody who's paying me, right? So the four things are really myself, but that's guilt. So when we're talking about shame, my wife, my family, it goes down, right? Anybody I'm paying, and then anybody who's paying me. Those are the four people that I will automatically accept shame from. Meaning I will consider what they have to say. I won't just let it go.
Yep.
Random internet troll who's commenting on this, and I don't know who you are. Love you, but you're not really even going to get through the first layer. Otherwise, how could we function as a society? Like, what right do you have to tell me what I ought not to do? Now, he may have a really good point. Like, I might read something randomly from some guy who has no authority at all over me, and I'm like, wow, he's got a really good point. So that's good. The Stoics talk about this. Like the Stoics talk about, like, when someone tells you what's wrong with you, don't tell them why they're wrong. Tell them three other things that are really wrong with you, so you can maybe get even more enlightened, right? So there is a great value in shame, again, because it has us pause. But the value is very, very short. It's like that long. If I carry the shame of a situation, again, my wife says, man, you really shouldn't have talked to Liam that way. You scared him. Okay. Now, I can use that to course correct, and it's useful and it's powerful in my life. When we're talking about employees, hey, you shouldn't have, talked to, Scott that way yesterday about his project. It really hurt his feelings. Now you have a choice. Who's telling you this? Is it someone you're paying? Is it someone who's paying you? Is a customer saying, hey, man, you shouldn't have done blah, 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 just insert whatever? You got to listen to this stuff. You don't have to, but you don't listen to it at your peril, right? So that shame can be useful to make the new choice. But once you've made the new choice, now you can offload the shame. Now the shame has no more value. It's about learning the lesson, and then it has no value beyond that.
And it has no value because it does, which I agree with. Or do we have to release that? Because, right, the shame can come back.
Well,
right?
the shame. So right. So when you're talking about shame, it's coming from other people. So the chances are the shame's never going to go away. As far as like, you know, in other words, there people will shame you. Let me be really clear here with my language. People will continue to shame you, but whether or not you consider or own any of that, you can let it go.
So you can only be shamed if you accept it.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, ultimately, shame is like a moral authority frame of you should have.
Mm.
And the ultimate that moral authority frame is you don't have to be that. You know, the government says you must do this with your kids. I'm going to decide what I want to do with my kids and then decide whether or not that government serves me in the meantime, right? Like I think this is something for most parents that they feel. Now there's certain things the government's going to say I want to do with my kids that I'll put up with and certain things I won't, right? Like look at the vaccine mandates and all of these things, right? Like this is a big topic,
Yeah.
but the shame's going to come. What I do with that shame is up to me. Ultimately, guilt and shame are great learning tools in the immediate. Past that, they're just poison. They're just rust to all your joints. Like they just become something that will take you down and kill you. The key is no guilt, no shame, new choices. Now, the way this came to be, I was working with a client who's an alcoholic, and he was just racked with guilt. Again, racked, right? Like being torn apart with guilt that he had wasted so many years of his life with alcohol. He didn't know how to recover. And I just felt for the guy. It was just really pure empathy. I'm just looking at him through the screen and saying, hey, man, like no guilt, no shame, like new choice, like make some new choices. All you can do now, okay, maybe you did waste 10 years of your life. Maybe you wasted 20 years of your life. But all you can do now is be the guy who's not wasting his life. Be the guy who's showing up right now for those people. And once you start doing that, remembering how you screwed it up doesn't serve you, doesn't put you forward. Now, let's talk about you as a business leader. Let's talk about you as somebody who's moving forward teams. You had better be really aware of when you're using shame, and I guarantee you probably are. You had to better be very aware of when your team members are feeling guilty. People make mistakes. Those mistakes cost money. Those mistakes cost time, right? People will be feeling guilt. So as a leader, what we can do is help them to understand the true meaning and use of guilt, the true meaning and use of shame, and then help them to get to that new choice so that moment can be over. We can learn the lesson and move forward. Again, I haven't put my finger down on a hot pancake griddle in 42 years. Why? I learned the lesson of that pain. Same with guilt, same with shame.
All of this is powerful, Coach, and it makes sense. And if you're listening right now, understanding the differences between the two, the guilt and the shame, and even if we're putting in choices, that one constant is time. And so there is an element here that cannot be brought back. The only word is right. The only
it's all you got. Like think about it. You're actually if you're holding on to guilt. Yeah, if you're holding on to guilt and shame, the thing you're holding on to it about is already gone. It's long gone. It's long gone.
Yeah.
So you only have the choice to make new choices by design. We imagine that we could go back in time and fix it, and we'll have these vast fantasies about what would life have been like if I hadn't done that. Well, you missed it. Like maybe in some crazy alternate multiverse theory, there's a you who didn't do that. Well, you know what? In your lifetime, you're never going to talk to that you. So you might as well get used to being this you and loving this you and saying, hey, if this comes up again, I'll do it different. And that's hard. Some of these things are really, really big. Like if you talk to me about me in my personal life, my first marriage was a train wreck. And my response to that was to just kind of isolate, separate. I started cheating. I just created like this whole life, fantasy life outside. I hate that. I look back and I'm like, why didn't I just have the integrity to say I'm miserable and I won't do this anymore? Why could I not stand up? Well, part of that was shame from the church and things that I was in. Part of that was guilt because I didn't want to create a marriage that broke for my kids. But you know what I ended up doing? Something 10 times worse. Now, given that choice again, where I'm in that same situation again, I would make a new choice. I would do something different. I would stand up and say, I won't live like this. How do I know that? I'm remarried. There have been situations where we've gotten into like patterns where I'm like, I can't do this. And what did I do? I didn't isolate. I didn't go, hide. I went straight to my wife and said, I can't do this. Like, I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to hurt me. I can't do this. Like, how can we fix this? And then together we made a new choice. I didn't have the integrity or strength to do that in my first marriage. But the thing is, I can't not be me. I'll always be a guy who cheated, but I won't always be a cheater. Why? Because I'm not cheating. Because I'm not that now. I can't go back in time and undo it, but I can learn the lesson and not repeat that thing. And now that's been really useful to me. Is it?
I love that.
You should never have needed to learn that lesson. Well, I did. And anybody who's feeling guilt or shame, the reality is you did. You needed to learn. How do I know? What's the 100% evidence that you needed to learn that lesson? Because here it is in your life.
Yep.
That's it. We don't have to think
because it happened. And I love that. I love that you said you will always be someone who cheated, but you are not a cheater any longer. You're no longer a cheater because the new choices in your life.
And I had better be very comfortable with the fact that that cheater's still in there. I haven't magically banished him, and it's the choices that I make every day. I could very easily go put my finger on any number of hot pans. It's not like that's the last time I ever burned myself. I've just never like purposefully gone and put my finger on a griddle, right? Like I've grabbed the wrong part of a pot, all that stuff, right? And I got to be aware of that too, but I don't have to feel shitty about it. Knowing that there's a part of me that can cheat and do all these horrible things, like to my relationship now, I mean, I would be an idiot. I would be naive to say, well, I can't cheat. I'll never do that again. Man, you're not thinking through shit very well. Of course that's in me. Unless we recognize that the damage and the negatives we're capable of producing, we're never going to really be able to transcend. We're just pretending and we're hoping. I don't want that. I want to say, okay, look, I cheated. I'll have always cheated, but I'm not a cheater, but not right now. And there is a cheater in me, and there is a part of me that wants to cheat, like that would take advantage of that. And I got to walk the other way. I choose to. Why? Because I remember what that felt like. I remember seeing all that pain. I remember seeing all that damage. I don't want that. Why?
Yeah, you remember the shame. You remember the guilt. You know the pain that it brought, and that continues to keep you from putting your finger on the griddle.
Yeah, and if you think about cheating on a wife, right, the guilt comes from me, and that's the worst. If you've ever cheated, really, it's its own punishment. I see people all the time like, I'm going to punish that cheating bastard. I'm like, look, trust me, it is its own punishment because it fucks with your integrity. It screws with the way you see yourself. Like, it is its own punishment. Like, no one is super happy cheating, and it's just bullshit. It just tears you to pieces emotionally, right? But I had guilt inside of myself. And then, of course, my ex, Emily, of course, she gave me shame for that, as well she should have, right? Because in our social contract, we don't do that. Like I didn't have to get married. I willingly chose, and I promised her that I wouldn't. Of course, the church we were in also gave me shame, which is nothing wrong with that either. Why? Because I broke the contract of the church. So they're saying, hey, man, you ought not to have done that. Now, bringing it up every day for the next 20 years is different than saying it once. Now, think about this in your organizations. When people break protocol, when people break standard operating procedure, you're going to use a modicum of shame. I guarantee you, because you're going to say, hey, don't do that. We don't do it this way. But remember what it's for. It's for getting a new outcome. It's for influencing the employee to make a new choice. Now, the new choice with employees might be you fire them on the spot, right? Because they just did something really dangerous or really over there. But remember, hey, you ought not to do that. Here's what I'd rather you do. And I think a lot of bosses and leaders don't do this. Here are the things that could have worked. Here's why I don't like this thing. So next time this happens, what will we do? And when they can tell you that, good. Now we've used the shame of our organization, or you didn't hit SOPs, whatever it is. Now we've used that effectively to get a new choice and to get the lesson learned. It's not about making the person feel bad. It's about making sure that they learn this lesson because it's important to us organizationally, and it's important to our mission.
Coach, listen, this was great, and I'm glad that we shared this today. Whether you are a leader in any level, you know what, and as a brother, sister, father, mother, husband, wife, it doesn't matter, personal life or an organization, you are going to be influencing somebody's life. And this information is absolutely critical. Like you said, it is an essential element, specifically in leadership. And this is why we're bringing this to you guys in this Language of Leadership podcast, understanding how to properly hold on and then release guilt, shame, and seeing the power of those and the power of new choices. Coach, listen, we've got this show happening every Monday right here at 11 a.m. Central Time. Before we leave, I want to give you the opportunity to share some final thoughts. I am grateful for this message today, but share some final thoughts and we'll let them go.
No guilt, no shame, new choices.
Love it.
No
right,
guilt,
listen,
no
love
shame,
it.
new choices. Like I'm just going to say it a third time. No guilt, no shame, new choices. Listen, no guilt, no shame without the new choices is a bad idea. Guilt and shame is also a bad idea, right? No guilt, no shame, new choices. Learn the lesson. Then you get to progress. Then you get to move forward. Then every dumb thing you've ever done or everything you did, every time you ever colored out a line becomes part of a bigger masterpiece instead of the actual frustration and end of who you are.
I love that. Powerful stuff. Listen, if you're not already hooked up with Coach Kevin, do me a favor. Check him out. We'll have it in the chat. Make sure to follow Coach Kevin. Make sure to follow us as well and let us know what you think about this program, Language of Leadership. We hope that it's impacting you. Let us know your thoughts. We want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments, connect with Coach, and check out our next program next Monday right here at 11 a.m. We will talk to you later. Thank you, guys. God bless, and have a great rest of your week. No guilt, no shame, new choices. See ya.